And we're live. Hi guys, this is Nikki Jones from Lifestyle Alchemy, and you're joining us on part 4 of the Shadows into Light shadow work with archetypes, and this is the last one that we'll be doing. It's really been a great experience for me, and I'm so glad that you guys could do this with me and go through this journey with me, and I hope that everyone's got a lot from it. And I'm really excited to bring you tonight's one, which is the Child Archetype. Now, tonight's archetype is quite intense in the way as it's the Child Archetype, yet there are many forms of the Child Archetype. So what we'll be doing tonight is, of course, we'll be going through the same sort of schedule as we've been doing in the last few webinars, but it's going to really be up to you to work out which is your archetype. So we'll get into that a little bit more. I'll just put my glasses on. I know I can see. Yay. Okay, so I'm going to. I just wanted to, of course, we've got Elizabeth with us tonight, and we've got Diane on the panel with us. So thank you guys again for jumping on. And so, yeah, let's just jump in. I'll share my screen. This is quite evolved, the Child Archetype, which is why I have left it to the last. A lot of people would actually start with the Child Archetype, as it's one of the first ones that we sort of come into play within our lifetime. So you guys can see that screen? Yep, great, thank you. So welcome, guys. Oh, it's just so sad, this is the last one. Okay, so the survival archetype we're doing tonight, of course, is the child. So the mature personality of the Child Archetype nurtures that part of us that yearns to be light-hearted and innocent, expecting the wonders of tomorrow regardless of age. This part of our nature contributes greatly to our ability to sense of playfulness in our lives, balancing the seriousness of adulthood and responsibilities. The balanced child is a delight to be around because the energy that flows from this part of our personality is positively infectious and brings out the best in others as well as in us. The child also establishes our perception of life, safety, nurture, loyalty, and family. Its many aspects include the wounded child, abandoned or orphan child, dependent, innocent, nature, and divine child. These energies may emerge in response to different situations in which you find yourself. Yet the core issue of all the child archetypes is dependency versus responsibility. When to take responsibility, when to have a healthy dependency, when to stand up to the group, and when to embrace communal life. Each of the variants of the Child Archetype is characterized by certain tendencies, including shadow tendencies, as is with all the archetypes. Okay, so let's get into the discussion on this. Okay. Ooh, sorry. Okay, cool. Okay, so first, I guess, let's talk about the differences between the inner child and the Child Archetype. Going back to my psychology days here. So, okay, so in modern day discussions of the Child Archetype, it must start with an understanding of the inner child. The concept of the inner child emerged in psychology, counseling, and healing therapies in the 1960s, and quickly became popular in a wide variety of professional and communal extents over the next sort of 30 years or so. The inner child is basically understood as a component of our psyche that contains what we learn and experience as children. Work with the inner child, it endeavors to uncover unmet desires and needs for childhood, as well as immature shadow patterns that drive detrimental behavior in adults. Depending on the therapist and client, the inner child can be seen as an aspect of the self that needs healing and or care, of that aspect of themselves that must be, or an aspect of themselves that must be parented, mended, and raised up. So the child archetype is different in that sorry, this is shaking again. The child archetype is different in that it's not purely an aspect of the mental psyche. The child archetype is an element of the soul. The child archetype is timeless, and although aspects of our childhood affect the perspective of our child archetype, the child archetype is not set in the past. My puppy. The child archetype is with us here and now, and part of our soul that requires we engage with questions of both innocence and maturity, which is hard work. So from the last slide, you now understand, I guess, there are many different types of child archetypes. There is the divine child, the wounded child, the nature child. There's the adult child, which is the child that raises their parents. There are many, many different types of child archetypes, and I can't go through them all, but I will go through the main ones that are predominant in today's society. So first of all I want you to understand is that you have all those different types in you. There are times when everybody feels like an orphan. There are times when everybody is wounded, and so on. When we are babies, we don't have the capacity to tell our parents, these are what I need. These are my personal needs as the individual that I am, as the individual soul that I am. And our parents are only human as well. So by the time you're even old enough to understand you have a need, a lot of these would have already been neglected. So to turn around and blame your parents is a pretty brutal thing to do to two human beings that have been caring for you, from that perspective anyway. Now obviously sometimes parents were brutal, but that's a different issue. But in all, there is a realism that says if you look at the lens of your life only through your wounded child, for example anyway, you're only going to see wounds, and then you can't get out of it, and it becomes, you become possessed by that wounded child. One of the reasons Johnny Depp is so popular is because he's the enchanted magical child, and he finds and plays those roles for himself. From the pirate, from Pirates of the Caribbean to the Willy Wonka, with Edward Scissorhands, the Mad Hatter, he absolutely embodies these wonderful roles. He brings out the enchanted magical child in himself, in his roles, just beautifully. And it's him. He plays these roles so well because he has that enchanted magical child archetype within him. So getting to know your own archetype and taking a look at it's crucial for you. It really is a crucial thing for you to do. If out of all the archetypes, you do your child archetype, this one I would say would be the most crucial for you to move on and to start to really shift things within your life. It's that crucial. So are you a magical child or are you a nature child? A nature child loves to be in the ocean, running around outside, barefoot, sitting in the garden, being outside. The archetype is this archetype is so much happier in the outdoors and functions much better in the outdoors than they ever will be by being inside. And I'm sure, all know children that are like this. They just do not like being inside. They don't like having their shoes on. They'd rather be digging around in the garden, yeah, climbing trees. And there's also a part of this where they commune with animals as well. They have a very close, almost symbiotic relationship with animals. I have a friend who's very much got this archetype within her, and she has animals literally come to her from wherever she is. She gets strays, the birds, the dogs, they all come to her because she has that archetype within her, and they sense that. So you have to start observing how many times in your own life, in your own world, in your ordinary day-to-day, the child takes over in your life. So as I mentioned before, there is the innocent, the divine, there is the nature child, wounded child, stepchild, adult child, etc. And we will get into each of these deeper shortly. So some small examples of some very quickly. The divine child. When you think of the divine child, you think of someone who has a deep abiding trust in God, the divine. You know when you meet someone and you see that kind of God spark within them, it's sort of a divinity radiating from them. They have the divine child archetype. The stepchild. Now for this one, think of Cinderella or Harry Potter. Both of these characters, they also have the embodiment of the magical child, and they show both sides, in fact. If you look at the orphan stepchild archetype of the child, they are always the ones that end up becoming magical or empowered. So how many orphans start out as the kid who eventually becomes, I mean, just take a look at fictional characters again. You have Dorothy from The Wizard of Oz, as well as Harry Potter and Cinderella. That archetype of, slow down, that archetype of the child that starts out on their own, they're starting out with a level of power, and that a level of power that child has to discover. So they kind of have a little bit of a head start there because they have to find that independence within themselves, and by finding that independence within themselves, they start off with this level of power, but it's still a level of power that they have to discover through their own transformation. So it's important for you to study, to observe the characteristics in yourself, and then become very much aware of when you are capitalizing on your own shadow. When you know when your child comes out, when you know you could act otherwise, but you're still acting out. This is not about being perfect, guys. It's not about perfection. I don't believe in perfection or promote perfection. We're humans. In saying that, in each of our lives are moments when we know exactly what we are doing and have opportunities to make much better choices. And we know our child is coming out in us. And the measure you use here is wisdom. If your behavior only hurts you, that's bad enough. You shouldn't be hurting yourself. If your behavior crosses the line and other people start paying for your outrageous temper tantrums as a child, in your child archetype, then you have to do something about your shadow with this. And you see this in a lot of people, but they do not recognize it as the child archetype. In naming all of these different archetypes with a child, the logical question is, which one am I? And what do I do with all this? Take a look at these aspects and realize you are dominantly one or two of these. You are not all of you are the nature child, the magical child, or the divine child. You are one or two of these aspects dominantly. You may display all of them at one time or another, but only one or two are part of your soul. What you want to do is balance in favor also of the positive. You want to look at the wounded child and ask, do I operate out of the wounded child all the time or most of the time? If you answer yes, then you're neglecting a whole part of you that needs to come out, that needs to be developed, that you're missing, that could also be the enchanted child or the magical child. You need to bring that out. So how do you bring that out? Start reading fantasy stories, fairy stories. Write a children's book. And not to be published, but for you, just for you, or even just for your children. Do something creative. Do something that is childlike play for you. Do something that represents an afternoon off for you. Use your imagination here, guys. Go out and be your go out and be in your garden, or do some gardening. Do something that brings out the nature child that may be in you. Make these types of things a practice. Grow some flowers in the house or something where it really takes your attention, your time and your effort to do so. And I say that because you've got to put effort into it. You've got to make it count. You've got to stretch yourself here. If you take it the easy way out, you're not doing anything. It should at first make you uncomfortable. Unless it makes you uncomfortable, you're not trying hard enough. Now, the child archetypes, its lessons, its roles, is to hone responsibility in you. That's its job. If it has one specific task in you, it is to always grind the wheel of responsibility, to always refine responsibility in you. Because if we are honest, all of us would prefer to be taken care of by someone or something else other than ourselves. All of us would love to have someone show up and say, here's your weekly allowance for doing nothing. All your bills are paid for. You can now go and do whatever you want. But that's just not really how things work, and that's just not the reality of the journey of humanity on this planet. And the responsibility is a fundamental task to the maturing of the soul, as is innocence. Responsibility and innocence are the two qualities that need each other. Now, they may look as if they are in opposition toward each other. They sound as if they should cross each other out in a way, I guess, which is why in our Western Christian puritanical productive society we pull out the old "you should grow up" nonsense. We have a God of productivity, which says if you're not doing something that produces something, what are you doing with your time? We have the notion that the balancing of responsibility and innocence, responsibility and trust, is one of the archetypal polarities of the soul. And that is active within each of us. And it is very delicate, and it feels very mature, and very, it's mutually exclusive within us. And yet the trust, if you look at it from this way, if responsibility and trust are two pinnacles, and they stand flat on the earth, which means you've given responsibility to one person and trust to another, you will never walk straight again. The only way the polarity of responsibility and trust function together is to have them move from the top of your head all the way through to your base, where trust comes from above and responsibility becomes your task here on earth. Okay. And the only way to do this is to have a strong soul. And the child within has to trust with the sense of innocence. If you give a child guidance and you say to a 5-year-old, go upstairs, I'll be right there. If you think it's consistent with all that is a loving in you as a loving person, as a loving parent, the child is not going to turn around and say to you, are you sure you're going to be up there? Because, I don't know, if the child doesn't do that. It's part of the enchantment with Santa. You say to a 3-year-old, there is a Santa Claus. They say, okay, cool. He will bring you gifts on the 25th. And the child says, awesome, okay, awesome, that's great, can't wait. There is a sense here of absolute, unbelievable trust that even the preposterous in the outside world is going to happen. And it does when that is the level of innocence. And that comes with, so follow this. I have enough trust that no matter how absurd your instructions are to me, I'll take responsibility for them. I will not sell my soul because I am afraid of the instructions you're going to give me. If you look at the people you really admire, where there are, let's go with mythic, for example, where what are the stories we love in our myths? The stories where we are told, where people are told outrageous things by the gods, whether they are ancient Greek gods or the Norse gods, which are the ones, I love the ancient Egyptians, and they pull them off. We love these people, we love them, because they didn't care about what anyone else said. They had complete trust and they took full responsibility. That is the polarity of the innocence of the child, the magical child, the divine child as well. Now you have that within you, and that's what you are striving for, and what you are it is very much in you. I want you to get that, because a lot of us will have a wounded child within us, or an abandoned child, and or a stepchild within us, and you need to really understand that you have that polarity of innocence in yourself, within the magical child, within the divine child. Now you have within you, and you have it within you. I really want to stress that to you guys, that you do have that within you, and that's what you really are striving for here. What actually happens when you are jealous of another person is you're ultimately jealous that they trust in a power greater than themselves, and that burns you up inside. And yeah, that's jealousy can be to do a lot of different things, I understand, but when you get to a symbolic archetypal side to this, ultimately what's happening is you're accessing your child archetype, and your jealousy is coming out because they're in touch with their magical child, they're in touch with their innocent child, they're in touch with their divine child, and you have not reached that maturity in your soul yet, and it bends you up. So I've talked a while there, sorry guys. So do you guys want to jump in and say anything on that point? I do have, what I am going to do is go through some slides with you, just to go through what the different archetypes are there. But Diane?
Yeah, and I was just going to say, before you said you're going to go through them again, you mentioned the nature child and like the enchanted or magical wizard child, and what was the third one?
The divine.
Divine.
Now, within saying that, there are many. There are, like I said, the adult child, there is the wounded child, there is the oh gosh, there's so many, any that you can think of. There is the independent child. There is many. The runaway child. There are a lot. What I'm going to be focusing on with you guys within this webinar is the 6 or 7 that are very predominant within today's society. So yeah, we'll get into them, and as I go through each slide, because I did put them on a slide, just because I know people do want the slides from these webinars, and the explanations are not mine. They're from an expert on archetypes, which is Caroline Mace, and I actually didn't give her credit on the slides, but we'll make that correction because they are her words. They're not my words. They're her characterizations of each archetypes, and they are done in a perfect manner. But I will go over them. Okay.
Yeah, it's actually quite a coincidence that you're doing this one tonight, because on Tuesday I did some work with my abandoned, unloved, hurt child.
Yeah. It's hard.
So it's
hard work, isn't it?
yeah.
It's very challenging because it's admitting a painful place in your life. So if you've confronted that part of yourself, now you're going to have to do a bit of work there, and that's fine. That's what you want to be doing. You need to work through that, because on the other side of it, as I was saying before, you're going to discover that you have a whole other side of yourself, which will be either the magical child, the nature child, the divine child, or whatever it may be. I have a feeling for you it may be the nature child.
Yes.
I can see you running around barefoot, loving being having a connection with yeah, very much.
I live outside in my garden. I love being outside in nature and beaches and whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. So anytime that we find that we do have a shadow, predominantly shadow aspect within the child archetype system, we really do need to look out and search for that lighter side. Now, each of them do have a shadow and a light as well. So, but we will go through that. So I will just, if that's cool, I'll just continue on.
Yep. Thanks.
Okay. Sorry, my notes. Okay. So the child archetype is characterized by innocence, playfulness, wonder, and awe. Nothing helps us better come into the moment and learn the great skill of presence and spiritual matters. Spiritual matters discuss the child archetype. You meet spiritual masters, and they're trying to reach this innocence and this playfulness and wonder and awe, and they're trying to do it in such a mature way that they're never going to actually get that. It's a great skill of presence that spiritual masters discuss. That the child archetype actually, the spiritual masters discuss this child archetype, and being present is nothing more than detachment from the past or the future, and absolute absorption in the moment, which is the child archetype. It's play. It's being in the moment. It's that playfulness. It's that wonder and awe, and a lot of spiritual people try to reach that. They try to reach it in very mature and dare I say unrealistic ways, because it's too serious a subject for them. There's no play in it. So think of a child at play. Nothing exists but what they are doing at that exact moment. Spiritual speakers, as I said, they spend entire lives trying to seriously recapture this gift. Enlightenment is mistaken for maturity. But the great teachers tell us that we must embrace innocence and playfulness to find that enlightenment in us. And they do. You'll find that within all of the great masters and ascended masters. The child archetype is not merely a side of us that needs attention, but a gifted, powerful force within that can help us grasp some of the most profound of life experiences. Okay? The child archetype is ever present in the world around us. Wow. And think about animals. Why else would animals play? It's because it's an essential aspect of living. It's a way to shake the fears and troubles of the world, and for one moment at least come into a communion with all that is beautiful in the world, to be at peace, to be at one. Okay, so now it is your job to identify with these different child archetypes and go through your history, so you identify with which one of the following 7, which I have put on slides, which are most predominant in today's society, is your dominant 1 or 2 child archetypes. So
I think in regards to me, the predominant one with me would probably be the wounded child archetype, because there are so many things that happened in my childhood that have impacted how I deal with things today. I'm not going to say that I don't still harbor some of the, I guess, emotional injuries that go along with those. I do, but because of those emotional injuries, I've changed the way in which I deal with my children. I go back to what I would have preferred to have in my childhood, and that's how I mold how I deal with my children. At the same time, I also have that inner child where you're constantly looking to see things as if it was the first time that you're seeing it. I constantly, proactively try to do that, because it's allowing me to go back to the wounded articles and see what possibly could have happened and why I reacted the way it did and how to move forward.
Yeah, I will also say that I definitely have the wounded child archetype within me, and that I used the word before, possesses me. It possesses you if you're only looking through the lens of the wounded child, and it did. It possessed me for a long time. the wounded child can be a very, very hard one to get out of. The wonderful thing about the wounded child is that we learn great lessons from it, and often what happens is from the wounded child. Now, at the moment, we're going through the 4 survival archetypes. I'm going to be doing a course after this one in a couple of months' time, after you absorb these 4 survival archetypes, where you can discover another 8 archetypes that are yours personally. No one else's, but yours personally. Because we are born with 12 of our primary archetypes. There are actually 12 primary archetypes that we have within our soul that are patterns within our lives over and over again. But I first wanted to do these 4 survival archetypes so that you could absorb these ones and put these into practice, so that when it comes time, when I do the next part of this course, and we start to discover your next 8, which is, again, yours personally, no one else's, it's going to be an easier process for you to do. It's going to be an easier identification process for you to go through. So in saying that, in being a wounded child, as being one of my archetypes, for me, what I found is I became the wounded healer. Through going through the traumas that I went through to cause me to be the wounded child, I obviously had to do a lot of work on myself, and coming through the other end of that, I learned how to treat people, how not to treat people. I learned a great deal of compassion, and I also learned that I wanted to give back to people, and that I wanted to help people so that no one would have to go through life as hard as what I had to. And so from that, you become the wounded healer. And that's exactly what I became. I literally became a healer. I did Reiki. You've heard that before. I did the crystal therapy. And one thing also that happens with a lot of wounded children is that it cracks us open in a way that it can lead us to divinity, the divine child as well. It can crack us so much, it can hit us so hard that it almost takes us out of our body. And in some cases it does take us out of our body, and we become very open and very sensitive. And in that way, we have grown a lot in that experience as well. It is not only have we broken through one barrier, but it's actually cracked us in such a way that it's actually given us a very, very divine gift. So, yeah, so they're hard lessons as a child to go through, and you usually go through them not only in your childhood, the same with abandoned child, same with the stepchild. You go through them in childhood, you'll go through them in your teens, you may even go through them in your early 20s. But once you get through that and come out the other side, you have so much compassion for other people. You have a greater capacity for humanity, if you like, a greater trust in humanity, as well as anything else as well. So it's a wonderful journey in that it leads you to become more enlightened through experiences that may have not been so good, but it allowed you to go down a road where you know that you would never ever treat someone else as badly as you may have been treated, if that is the case. And it teaches you exactly how you do not want to be treated, and in that way you will never ever treat anyone in that way. So yeah, cool. So I'll go on to my slides now. I'm not going to be able to see you guys, so if you want to speak about one of these archetypes as I bring them out, just unmute yourselves and yeah, just jump out. Okay. Sorry. Okay, you guys seeing that? Great.
Yes.
Yeah, we can see it.
Thank you. Okay, so the first one is the wounded child. The wounded child archetype holds the memories of abuse, neglect, and other traumas that we have endured during childhood. This is the child pattern most people relate to, particularly since it has become the focus of therapy since the 1960s. Many people blame the relationship with their parents that created their wounded child. For instance, for all the subsequent dysfunctional relationships. On the positive side, the painful experience of the wounded child often awakens a deep sense of compassion and the desire to help other wounded children. From a spiritual perspective, a wounded childhood cracks open the learning path of forgiveness. The shadow aspect may manifest as an abiding sense of self-pity, a tendency to blame our parents for our current shortcomings, and to resist moving on through forgiveness. It may also lead us to seek out parental figures in all difficult situations rather than relying on our own resourcefulness. Now, this example uses our parents, but as we well know, there are other circumstances and other people that come in and out of our life that can cause the wounded child. A serious case of being bullied can cause a wounded child. There are parents, it can be a big one for the wounded child, but there are other influences that can cause the wounded child to come up. So don't just look at this and think it's just a parental thing to have the wounded child within you. There are many different things that can happen to us that can traumatize us as a child that gives us the wounded child archetype. So the orphan child or the abandoned child. Okay, so from little orphan Annie to Cinderella, the orphan child is most well known children's stories reflecting the lives of people who feel from birth as if they are not part of their family, including the family psyche or tribal spirit. But because orphans are not allowed into the family circle, they have to develop independency early on. The absence of family influences, attitudes, and traditions inspires or compels the orphan child to construct an inner reality based on personal judgment and experience. The shadow aspect manifests with orphans never recover from feeling of abandonment, and scar tissue from family rejection stifles their maturation, often causing them to seek surrogate family structures to experience tribal union. Therapeutic support groups become shadow tribes as families for an orphan child who knows deep down that healing these wounds requires moving on to adulthood. For that reason, establishing mature relationships remain a challenge. So moving on to the next one. So so those two I just went through, by the way, are very shadowy, obviously. But they do have their light sides as well, as you can see, but they started off in their shadow. So the magical innocent child. The magical child sees the potential for sacred beauty in all things and embodies qualities of wisdom and encourages in the face of difficult circumstances. One example is Anne Frank, who wrote her diary that in spite of all the horror surrounding her family while hiding from the Nazis in the attic, she still believed that humanity was basically good. This archetype is also gifted with the power of imagination and that the belief that everything is possible. The shadow energy of the magical child manifests as the absence of the possibility of the miracles and the transformation of evil to good. Attitudes of pessimism and depression, particularly when exploring dreams, often emerge from an injured magical child whose dreams were, once upon a time, thought foolish by cynical adults. The shadow may also manifest as a belief that energy and actions are not required, allowing one to retreat into fantasy. All good on that one? Cool. I'll just say those are cool.
Yes. Yes.
Cool. The nature child. This archetype I have the nature child. I have the nature child. This archetype inspires deep, intimate bonding with natural forces and has a particular affinity for friendship with animals. Although the nature child has tender emotional qualities, it can also have an inner toughness and ability to survive. The resilience of nature and herself. Nature children can develop advanced skills of communicating with animals, and in stories reflecting this archetype, an animal often comes to the rescue of its child companion. That's funny because I actually always did that. Many veterinarians and animal rights activists resonate with this archetype because they have felt a conscious rapport with animals since childhood. Other adults describe being in communication with nature spirits and learning to work in harmony with them in maintaining the order of nature. The shadow aspect of the nature child manifests in a tendency to abuse animals and people in the environment, which I cannot stand people who do that. A love of animals is not sufficient to qualify for this archetype. However, a lifelong pattern of relating to animals is in an intimate and caring way, to the extent that your psyche and spirit need these bonds as a crucial part of your own well-being, is your best clue. So Diane, how do you feel about that one?
Well, I've got 4 footballs running around.
You've got what?
So I totally relate to that one. I've got 4 cats.
Oh, 4 cats. Yeah, beautiful. Yeah. Yes, you know, I
I just keep adopting them because I can't handle cats that are going to be put down. So whenever I come across them, I adopt them. And legally, I'm only meant to have 2.
Yeah.
So
I have. Yeah. Yeah. So they radiate to you also because they feel that within your nature and within your soul that's a part of your being. So I was talking to a beautiful soul on chat on Facebook the other day, and we were talking about our animals, and you know, I obviously have a deep love. Anyone who's seen my Facebook page knows I have a deep love for my dog. I'm always praising my dog. I also have a black cat, but I also have 5 strays that I've had now for about a year, and I saw them as kittens, and I tried to get help for them, but unfortunately in Australia it's very hard to get help for strays because we're just so overcrowded within our care system for abandoned or stray animals, and I will not put an animal into a care facility where they have like a 2-week lifespan, or unless there are some organisations that do have a no-kill policy, but unfortunately a lot of them are very full. And when I first found these strays, they were all full, so they now I guess they're not really strays, they're really my cats now. So and the funny thing about them is my cat, which is the indoor cat, she's black. The other 4 are black outside. So I have 5 black cats and one ginger cat. So I look completely like the weird witch cat lady right now. So yeah, I have actually been called in the street crazy cat lady. It's fun, but still, I found it quite amusing. So moving on from
I get that as well, the cat lady.
I didn't think I'd get it for another thing. I mean, I would love to have a farm where I can have horses, ducks, chickens, you know, everything, cats, dogs, horses, everything just running around. That would just be my perfect heaven. It's a beautiful farm with an veggie garden. Just that's me. That's my life. That's my dream.
Sounds awesome.
So moving on. Okay, so the Purella Eternus, which is the eternal boy or girl or eternal child. This archetype guides us to remain eternally young in body, mind, and spirit, and not to let age stop us from enjoying life. The shadow eternal child often manifests as an inability to grow up and embrace the responsible life of an adult. Like Peter Pan, the eternal boy resists ending a cycle of life in which he is free to live outside the boundaries of conventional adulthood. The shadow Puella Eternus, which can manifest in women as extreme dependence on those who take charge of their physical security. She cannot be relied on, nor can she accept the aging process. Although few people delight in the end of their youth, the eternal child is somewhat left floundering and ungrounded between the stages of life because of not having a laid foundation for the functional adulthood. So Peter Pan here really is the perfect example for the eternal boy, and he both shows quite well. If you've seen any of the Peter Pan movies, he demonstrates quite well the enlightened side of this archetype as well as the shadow archetype. Okay, so the dependent child. So the needy or dependent child carries a heavy feeling inside that nothing is ever enough and is always seeking to replace something lost in childhood, although exactly what is never clear. As with the wounded child, this leads to bouts of depression, only a little more severe. The dependent child tends to be focused on his own needs, often unable to see the needs of others. As with all apparently negative archetypes, you can learn to recognize its emergence and use it as a guide to alert you when you are in danger of falling into needy, self-absorbed attitudes and behaviors. The dependent child is a hard one. The reason the dependent child is a hard one is because it can never, it's a dependent child and a dependent adult can never really put their finger on why they are the way they are. It's usually such a deep-seated issue within them that it can never be addressed head-on in a way. What I would suggest to you, if you do have the dependent child archetype as a dependent adult, I would suggest cognitive therapy, cognitive behavioral cognitive behavioral therapy for you. This method of therapy is very good at addressing issues in which you do not have to have an understanding of where these behaviors or attitudes are coming from. It allows you to work from where you are at and not have to worry about the causation of them and move forward from that point. So just for those out there that are relating to the dependent child, that's just one thing that I would relate to you. So again, that's cognitive behavioral therapy, and it is very, very good and very, very effective. Okay. The divine child. The divine child is closely related to both the innocent and magical child, but is distinguished from them by its redemption mission. It is associated with innocence, purity, and redemption, godlike qualities that suggest that the child enjoys a special union with the divine itself. Few people are inclined to choose the divine child as their dominant child archetype. However, because they have difficulty acknowledging that they could live continually in divine innocence, pardon me, and yet divinity is also a reference point of your inner spirit that you can turn to when you are in conscious process of your choice. You may also assume that anything divine cannot have a shadow aspect, but that's not realistic. The shadow aspect of this archetype manifests as an inability to define itself against negative forces. Even the mythic gods and most spiritual masters, including Jesus, who is the template of the divine child for the Christian tradition, simultaneously express anger and divine strength when confronting those who claim to represent heaven while manifesting injustice, arrogance, or other negative qualities. So think of Jesus' wrath at the money charges in the temple. Assess your involvement with this archetype by asking whether you see life through the eyes of a benevolent, trusting goddess, or whether you tend to respond initially with fear of being hurt or with a desire to hurt others first. So the divine child is a difficult one to relate to and to find closeness to, and a lot of people will only relate to their divine child archetype in their later life, when they have lived a little bit more of their own life and experienced a little bit more, when they're able to be comfortable with saying that they have that divinity within them. Other people may recognize it within them, but it is much, much, much more harder for them to actually admit this within themselves. One of the problems with this also is admitting to having the divine child archetype. It can stop people because they don't want to seem egotistical by it, I guess would be a good word. They don't want it to seem egotistical by having a divine connection, or however you want to say it. So sometimes it involves a lot of maturity within a person to be able to identify with this archetype. Is that all? Right from all. That's it. Okay. Did you guys want to say anything about any of those archetypes? I know it's pretty straightforward tonight because it's this one is about giving you the information that you need to pick those ones which are yours. This isn't one where I'm saying this is what you've got, this is what you're going to be dealing with, this is the shadow of it, this is the light with it. You have to choose your child archetypes here, so it is a lot harder. Diane?
No, it's been really, really interesting. I've really enjoyed it. I found the one about the orphan child and the abandoned child and the wounded child quite interesting, because they I know you talk about them separately, the wounded child and the orphan/abandoned child, but there still seems to be some overflows with them.
Yeah, they're definitely similar, similarities with them. You will find when you look at those, you want to look at your emotional status when you're thinking about being an abandoned child or whether you're a wounded child. Do you have a feeling of abandonment? Do you feel that you've been left out of a tribal situation? Is your root chakra suffering?
Yeah, that was really, really interesting to hear that, because if I relate back to I know I never fitted in with my family, I just didn't belong, but I did gravitate towards friends that had regular family gatherings, and I was always part of those gatherings. So I was always, it's like exactly what you're saying, I needed a tribe to belong to. And even in my older life, I found that although I like my independence and I like being on my own, I still need to belong to a group of some kind.
Oh, yeah. And then if you're doing them in healthy ways, which I've seen you do, which I have seen you do, it's fine. I mean, we're human beings. We need interaction. We need that group society. It's when you see people who can't go without going out, who cannot stand being at home alone, cannot stand the thought of there's a party going on and they can't go to it. They have to be a part of everything that's going on. That's more of the shadow side of the abandoned. Is they need to always be involved in some sort of group activity. They can't sit by themselves. They can't be with themselves. So, Elizabeth?
I'm just like, I don't know where you say the abandoned child. You know, I can identify a little bit with that, but I don't think it resonates with me, because instead, you know, my mother was not present for a good part of the time that I was living with her. But instead of, you know, looking for someone else to fill that void, I filled that void. I became the adult.
Sure.
I'm the one that was taking care of everything.
Yeah.
So, you know, I view it more as a wounded child because you took what was there and you decided how it needed to be dealt with. You know, I also was surprised to find the magical or the innocent child was definitely part of that. And now I'm forgetting what the first one was. So, but I was surprised to find that there was 3 aspects that I identify more with out of the 4. I would have thought it would have been more 2.
Yeah, yeah. And look, some people can, predominantly you are going to display 1 or 2. If we have one of the, if within our maturation of our soul that we have come through the abandoned, the wounded child, the adult child, if we've come out through the other side of that, it's then and only then that we may take on the other 2 archetypes, that we have that 1 or 2, the 3 archetypes. We still have that wounded child or that abandoned child within us. We've worked through it where it doesn't interfere with our life as much anymore. So if you're feeling that you've connected with the wounded child, like myself, have worked through it, and now that you're feeling that you now feel more connected to the magical child or the nature child as well, that's completely in the realm of possibilities, is because it's now become more of your life. That childlike play nature has come out in your life more now than what the wounded child is coming up. It still will come up to remind you every now and then, but you know how to recognize its shadow now. Now, going back to what we were saying with the abandoned, the difference between the abandoned child and the wounded. So I explained how the abandoned child functions. The wounded child has a feeling of hurt. The wounded child goes through periods of depression. The wounded child goes through periods of aggression. A whole series of different emotions and their coping mechanisms. The wounded child is often withdrawn as a child also, and as Elizabeth was saying, becomes very independent within that becoming withdrawn. So that's kind of the difference there, is where the abandoned child will seek out people to be with, to seek out that family, whereas the wounded child will go within themselves to find their own security, work their own stuff out, and then find their own independence in that. So does that make sense to both of you there?
Yeah, I think it does. You know, I know that when I'm with my friends, I can be a little bit of, I glom the attention a little bit. I understand that. I try to, when I catch myself doing that, I tend to back up and try not to be the center of attention. I don't like being the center of attention, but sometimes I go towards it. So no, I can understand that. But in regards to the divine aspect of the child, that confuses me a little bit because, you know, we grew up in a varied religious household, as my children are doing now. I grew up Jewish and Protestant, and my children have grown up with Catholicism and with Quakers and, you know, all this stuff. And I only found balance once I started learning about the law of attraction, because that just to compile everything that I had thought by studying all these religions and couldn't understand why they felt so drastically different from one another when it's actually all the same thing.
Exactly. And that's more what the divine child is about. Yes, it can be related to mainstream religions, Catholicism, you know, Protestant, all of those. It can be, because someone can have that. What you would find in that divine child who is following the mainstream Christians is they will probably also have the nun archetype within them. That will be one of their other primary archetypes, whereas they have an absolute devotion to God in that way, and that's where their divinity comes in. For people like yourself and myself, our divinity in that way comes through a different stream of spiritualism, in where we have an understanding that all is one and one is all. Some people are not there and may not ever get there, which is fine. It's their journey. But there is definitely the two ways of experiencing that divinity of that child archetype. Another way I've seen the expression of the divine child is someone who is born with sensitive abilities, who's born with gifts I don't like using the word psychic, but who have psychic abilities, sensitive, empaths, and they usually display these characteristics early on in life. And that's another way of identifying with the divine child within yourself, as well as understanding and having a deep interest in the spiritual path and being a spiritual seeker. And that's actually another archetype. So if you do have the divine child archetype within you, you will also find that you will be some sort of spiritual seeker. Is also one of your primary archetypes. So it kind of makes sense. Did I jumble that a little bit? So
no,
really,
that makes a lot of sense, because you look at it and you can see that there's two very distinct parts, but there's also much more minuscule things that can play into it. So it gets a little confusing.
This is why the child archetype really is so hard, is because it has to come from individuals' aspect. You can't look through it through the lens of anyone else's but your own experiences. Now I can explain it to you through a Christian Catholic perspective of how they would relate to the divine, and I can explain to you how a spiritualist would relate to it, but I can also explain to you how someone who has become or born with different gifts of empaths and sensitive and psychics, and there are people out there that are like that, and they are born with these gifts and they display them early on, and they develop them as they mature as well. And as they mature from the divine child, it comes out even more, and they become the mystic, or they become, like I said, the truth seeker, or the prophets even. There's many, from the child archetype, and working out, if we can really work out what our child archetypes are, those one or two, and within the shadowy aspects of the abandoned child or the wounded child, or the stepchild, if we have worked enough through them, then we will find ourselves that we will do have the nature child, and yes, we do have the divine child, yes, we have the magical child, and we've also got the nature child as well. So you'll find, if you're a little bit older doing this, and you have already done some work with yourself, you will actually find that you will relate to probably three of these, because you have overcome a lot of the shadow aspects of the shadowy child archetypes. So yeah, a fair question. Very, very good question as well, actually. So great for asking.
I'm finding this whole thing very interesting because, as you're aware, I've been working through a lot of my issues from my childhood and the past. Since you and I met, I've been going through many, many changes, and I'm sure you've seen them, but I'm understanding more of how things impacted me. And by doing that, it's very interesting, because I didn't know that there was this whole train of thought about the archetypes, but it fits in with what I've been learning this entire past year, and the changes that I've been making in my life, and the thinking that I'm trying to push forward. I don't want to be stuck in the negativity anymore. That ruled my life for a good long portion, and I'm trying to figure out how best to move forward without bringing any negativity with me. So I'm just finding the whole series that you're doing very enlightening.
Oh, I'm glad. I'm glad, and this is the reason why. I mean, you know that I am a big believer in the law of attraction and manifestation, and I think by doing this work, if you're interested in being a law of attraction manifester, doing shadow work is one of the best things you can do for yourself, is because you're allowing yourself to be your true self. And once you're your true self, your thoughts are going to be so much clearer because you're going to overcome your shadow. You're going to be more aware of your shadow, and you're going to move beyond your shadow. I'm not saying that you're never going to not, play out some shadow aspects in life, because we're only human. We're going to do it. It's just going to happen. But we're going to be aware of it. And we're going to go, we may not be aware of it at the moment either. We may look back on it and go, I was acting out there as a shadow aspect there. I could have done this instead, but, you're aware of that now. It doesn't just sit there and become part of your past. You're aware of it, and then the next time that sort of the same situation can come about, you're then able to go, aha, I know you. I've seen you before. I'm not going down that path. I know the enlightened path, and that's the path I'm going to choose. And this is what this does to you. It lets you see the world symbolically. It lets you understand yourself in the symbolic language of the archetypes. And it lets you understand that we all have a shadow side, and we all have a light side, and we all have a choice in which way we can take. It's just having that awareness about yourself. So it's a natural journey, and on the spiritual journey, what you're going to find is that you will never stop. If you found the law of attraction, no, you don't. If you found the law of attraction, you're going to have questions. That's going to lead to more questions. You're going to get some answers, and then that's going to lead to more questions, and it's going to lead to more work, and then it's going to lead to more questions and more answers and more work. And it's a beautiful thing, because what happens then is that you never stop learning. You never ever stop changing as a person and becoming the best you that you could possibly be. And really, isn't that all we really want? Is not to be perfect, but just to be the best possible person that we can be. And we can't ask anything more of anyone else in our lives. No?
I think that's been the most exciting journey for me, and I can resonate with, I think Elizabeth feels the same with the work that she's been doing, is as you learn something and you implement it within your own life, or you identify something that you can change within your life, you move into the next level of being who you are, and then you learn something else, and then you can, so you're constantly, as you say, working on yourself and growing as an individual. And it is amazing because you accept yourself far more.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's an amazing journey. I mean, life is amazing, and we have to embrace life in all its, horrific terrors and all its beauty. Because even if it's horrific terrors, it can be beautiful from the lessons that we learn from it. And if you are on a spiritual journey, you are on the journey of a lifetime, because you are going to find out so much about yourself, about the world around you, and also the people around you, and you're going to enjoy life so much more, and you're going to get so much more out of life. You're going to feel a lot more joy within your life, and you're going to be able to share that with the people around you, and you're going to spread that message as you go along as well. Because what I found over the years of me doing this is that there's so many people now that are doing it. It used to be that you could hardly talk about this stuff, and that you used to have to be very selective who you would talk to about spiritual matters with, because you would be judged. And nowadays it's almost become common conversation, and I love it.
I think that fear is creating a lot of the stigmas that people go through. The fear of being judged, and fear of other people's opinions being placed on you. One of the things I realized last night, I'm writing down things as I go now, is that there's a lot of divorce, and children of divorce are led to believe that some major component has gone wrong. And I was thinking about it last night, and I realized that it wasn't so much that some major component had gone wrong when my parents decided to divorce, as it was the perception of the people treating divorce, because
Sure.
my life wasn't changing. I didn't ever remember my parents being together. They both had individual lives that didn't affect each other. And then it was when all these people came in trying to fix the problem because, oh my goodness, the parents were getting the paper divorce, that caused the problems, that caused my fear of things falling apart, that caused my distrust with my mom because they said someone had to have failed at the marriage. But if they had just turned around and said, oh, by the way, nothing's going to change, you're already here, this is the life you've got, you know, none of those problems would have ever reared their heads because I didn't have the family unit that they were expecting to be coming apart. I had two separate family units that up until that point were totally happy. So,
Yeah.
you know, it was society's stigma that was
Yeah.
related to the concept of divorce that actually created the stigma between my mother and myself.
Absolutely. And I think it was much more of a problem when we were younger. I know that my parents are still together and very much in love. It's very much in love. It's sickening. No, it's beautiful. No, it is. It's beautiful. I love them. But when I was younger, they were one of the few people that were still married, and a lot of other children around me were getting, you know, their parents were divorced, and even the children that were are from divorced families would still have problems with the other people that were from divorced families. It was like, you're right, it's the stigma that comes along with it. But you find now that with these days with teenagers that are going, or even younger tots that are going through separations and divorces, that it's more widely accepted now. It's not such a big deal. It really is not such a big deal. It's actually, I mean, it was rare back when I was younger that you know, parents were together, but there was still a lot more people together back then than what's happening sort of now. And so because there is this sort of incline of people that are making the decision, it's actually better for the child for us to separate, and the understanding within the community and with society that there is not as much pressure on the children from these circumstances of divorce or separation. And you would know.
I think, too, that part of it is that people are more honest about what's going on. They're not trying to hide what's going on. Because back then, my parents believed that by not talking to me about what was going on, they were protecting me. So all I had was these people who were trying to help and their description of what was going on to base my understanding of what was happening on. Now, in my divorce that I had previously, my kids knew everything that was going on. They knew why it was happening and that it had nothing to do with them. You know, that the process was just two adults were growing apart and that it was healthier for everybody involved to be separated and that it would better enable the relationships for people to work on them individually than as a whole. And they're great with it. You know, that's not the problem. They don't have a problem with divorce, but it was everybody else's perception when we were younger that actually created the problem.
Yeah. So it's having that dialogue now that we didn't have when we were, say, in the 80s or the 70s. There wasn't that dialogue, or even back in, more so back into the 60s if we want to go back that far. But there definitely was not as much dialogue going on between parents and children. And other parents, and and then of course the children would find out, and this is where we had the problem with children getting, you know, attacked for the reason of their parents as being divorced, and then the confusion coming in because then there was no dialogue with the parents, which is not happening now, which is a good thing. The awareness is out there now that where people will sit down with their children and they, like yourself, where they do have a dialogue and explain to them what is happening. We are learning that our children are so much more intelligent than we think they are. We don't want to tell them that, but they are. We can talk to them about things that we may think are adult conversations, But really, it is better to have these conversations with these our children so that they have a better understanding of what's happening within not only their own lives, but in the family life and with society life as well. And that's a great thing to see happening in society, where we are able to sort of talk to our children in that manner and have an open conversation with our children, so that there is no confusion and there is less stress and less emotional distress going on within children in today's society, because there's a lot of stuff that they have to put up with. So if we can help them in any way, then...
Well, the thing is, if you discuss it, then you can work through it. If you don't discuss it, it festers and causes other problems. So the idea is not to allow it to fester and to have everyone grow and work through it.
Yeah.
So, and I just totally killed and took over your whole thing. I'm sorry.
It comes back to the abandoned child anyway, because or even the stepchild. And the difference between someone who is going to feel that they are related to this archetype is a parent who is not dialoguing with them, who is not communicating with them about what's going on. They're going to have an understanding of the situation, which is going to give them comfort and not give them scar tissue, if you want, or emotional scar tissue, if you want to put it that way. So it is completely relevant, and it's just teaching people that may be listening that, you know, if you are going through, if you have children of your own, and you are going through this situation, then have this dialogue with your children, because you do not want them to have the abandoned child archetype. Although, you know, I will say great lessons can come from it, and or the stepchild archetype, again, great lessons can come from it. And a lot of empowerment and independence can come from it, but you can soften that blow for them, and even if they do still relate to it, even after having a good dialogue with them, it's not going to be as challenging for them to find the enlightened side of that archetype as it would be if there was no dialogue at all. So completely relevant. Oh, cool. So just touching on that again, so just with those shadowy aspects that we have talked about within the child archetype, just remember that, yeah, I did say one or two. You should very much have a dominant one or two with these archetypes, but if you're an older adult and you're watching this, you may indeed find that you have three. we're all older here. we may relate by that time in our lives, because we have moved so much past that archetype. But do know that archetype is within your archetypal system as well. It's just, it doesn't pop up as much. So I guess I do have just one. I was running a little. The last one. Who cares? We're running a little bit over time. But just some questions that you can ask yourself. So, in identifying with your child archetype, some questions you can ask yourself is: so the child archetype is concerned with the tension between independence and dependence. Individuality and the need to belong are constant draws for the child archetype within us all. When considering your own child archetype, ask yourself, how do you manage the balance between these two extremes? Do you balance from independence to over-dependence? Do you insist on not being too dependent on anyone? Do you take on too much responsibility or try to have as few strings attached as possible? So they're just a few questions that you can ask yourself in trying to relate, in trying to find out your child archetypes, in what are your dominant child archetypes. And it may take you a little bit of work just to go through that, and you're going to have to, again, as I've said with all of these, look back on your past history to right back, where 30s, for your 20s, for your teens, and even early childhood, in especially this case. And you know, look for these patterns that come up, and look for these associations that come up, and then you're able to work with them in, and then you will know which one or two of these are definitely predominant in your life, and if you're at that mature stage in your life, you're able to even take on that third one. So yeah, so this one really is for you to have a bit of. I've left this one again, like I said, a lot of people do teach this first because it's the first one we come into contact with as children, but I've left it as last because it's going to leave you with more work to do in between. So I think it's a good one to leave you with, so that you can have that time within the next couple of months before I do this next workshop, and you can really discover these parts of yourself. You can really dive into your child archetypes, which is going to take you longer than the others. You can really look at your victim archetype. You can really go into saboteur and look at how that's been affecting your life and how you can overcome that. And look at the prostitute archetype and how that's been affecting your life and how you've dealt with those issues. And just go through life going, this is the victim, this is the prostitute, or I'm stepping into my child archetype. And try and keep looking at your behavior symbolically like this, and practice that symbology, not only with yourself, but when you're interacting with other people also. So when you're having a conversation, and this isn't judging, this is just your way of understanding where other people are. It's actually allowing you to relate to them better as well and have a better understanding of where you're at. Because you can tell by talking to another person, this person's in the victim archetype. Okay, this is how I'm going to have to deal with them. And you deal with them in the healer archetype in a lot of these cases, or the counselor archetype. This may not be one of your main archetypes in your 12 primary archetypes, but it may be what you need to jump into in that situation. You might see someone who's sabotaging yourself, and you realize that now, and you can maybe help them steer out of that so that they're actually having a better choice or to turn to, rather than sabotaging something that could be a wonderful new experience for them. So I guess I'll leave you with that, guys. So have fun with working with those archetypes with yourself and with other people, and look out for them in your everyday life, and look out for them in other people's everyday lives, and you will become an expert at working with your shadow and working with your light, and understanding people from a symbolic world, which is a world that is not personal. So I look forward to seeing you guys in a couple of months' time on a course that I will be doing, where we will explore the 8 archetypes that will complete your 12 primary archetypes. And of course, as I said before, those 8 archetypes are your personal archetypes. So this next course is going to be a lot of work for you. So use this, what we've done as practice, because the next part of this course is going to be a lot of work. Okay. Thank you very much for joining me on this webcast series. I've enjoyed presenting it to you guys, and I've really enjoyed the feedback from everybody. I want to thank my panelists for coming on and asking questions on behalf of everyone else out there. And it's been an absolute pleasure doing this, and I look forward to doing the next part with you all as well. And I will keep you informed. So, love and light to all. Thank you all.
Yes, thanks so much, Nikki. It's been really very interesting, and I look forward to the next one.
Great, fantastic. Thank you for being a part of it, Diane, and thank you, Elizabeth.
Bye.